Hello and happy Saturday. Welcome to the Weekend Spectator with Paul and Grace. This is a new podcast powered by the American Spectator. My name is Grace Reilly and I'm here with Paul Kengor. We're really excited to be bringing this to you now every single week. And we're excited to bring you a lot of really cool topics. Today, we're going to be talking about the 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence, and a story that Paul Kengor just wrote. And we're excited to have you join us for this new chapter.
Yeah, and what else would anybody want to do on a weekend but sit down and watch us, Grace?
Of
Right?
course, right? What
So,
better really is there to do, right?
so the American Spectator readers will now be the Weekend Spectator watchers, and they can watch the brilliance just exude from the two of us right onto their computer screens.
Oh,
So what a
absolutely.
deal. And it's free.
It's free, and when you finish the work week, be counting down because now you still have American Spectator on the weekends for you, extra American Spectator on the weekends, and we're excited to be doing this.
And we've had a podcast for a while, right? With Melissa McKenzie, Scott McKay, and the most recent, I think it was Ellie Gardy Holmes, and Lyra Margot did one together. And by the way, Ellie, so readers know it's Ellie Gardy. She just got married, so it's now Ellie Gardy Holmes, and she has a new book out on Gavin Newsom, which is just going to be a blockbuster. And we've
Excellent
been
timing, too.
yeah, really. And we've been advertising it at the website. I strongly encourage people to get it because I mean Gavin Newsom, I don't know. He could be the next Democrat nominee for president. I mean, I don't know where this is going to go. But Joe Biden is just I mean, I know we're going to talk about the American founding, but I guess we could hit this a little bit, right? Last week we had the presidential debate, and I'm convinced, Grace, that Joe Biden lost the presidency at that debate. And in fact, 4 years ago, there were to be three presidential debates in 2020. Now they had the first one, and I was convinced Donald Trump lost the presidency in that one because he was, I mean, in retrospect, right? He was aggressive, bombastic, kind of really went after Biden. Just kind of, I mean, Biden wasn't good either, any better. I mean, Biden's a sleazy guy, but Trump was really aggressive and kept pounding him and pounding him. I think I know why. If you watch Biden's last debate, which would have been when he was vice president against Paul Ryan, he was just smirked and rolled his eyes and laughed and mocked every time that Paul Ryan said something. And I think the strategy of the Trump people was, we're not going to let him do that. We're going to punch him in the jaw. And when he goes down and tries to get up, we're going to punch him again, and we're going to jump on him and keep pummeling him. And that might have pummeled Biden, but it made Trump look overly aggressive. I was watching the debate with a former Grove City College professor. I won't note who it is, but I teach at Grove City College. Grace graduated from Grove City College. And this guy's very pro-Trump. And I tell you, Grace, he was yelling at the TV screen. He was saying, Trump, shut up, shut up. Let Biden speak. And this guy was convinced that Trump could out-debate Biden, but he wouldn't let him speak. So all of which is to say, and then the next debate after that in 2020 was canceled because of COVID. And then the third debate, which I think came about a week before the vote, Trump was great. And he was more restrained, in control, not as impetuous. And a number of people said, boy, I'd vote for him now, but I already sent in my mail-in ballot and it's too late to change it now. So I thought Trump lost the 2020 election in his first debate. I'm convinced, you want a prediction, that Joe Biden lost re-election in 2024, that first presidential debate, because that was just disastrous. He looked awful.
Oh, and I think that you hit on a good point too, that I would say that this was Trump's best debate performance in the sense that the strategy was correct. Trump basically just, he sat back and let Biden do his own talking, which in this circumstance was all Biden needed to do to
Right.
just shovel the hole deeper and deeper and deeper that he's dug for himself. Because the American people watched a disaster. It was embarrassing for Biden, embarrassing for the Democrats, for his team. And Trump didn't even have to do anything. All he had to do is stand there, talk coherently, and then he was already winning without even the policy that he was talking about and the points he was making. And
Well, while
yeah,
Biden talked incoherently, right? And
exactly.
yeah, in
It was
fact,
crazy to watch. And so just a little background because we didn't really do this in the beginning. So for the readers know that you're the editor of the American Spectator. I was an intern at the American Spectator about a year ago and have been contributing ever since and graduated from Grove City College, which is how Paul Kengor and I met. And that's the connection there. And I'm sure that you've seen some of our other work that we've done together. But what I'm doing now is working for Restoration of America on their social media team. So it was my job to be watching the debate, live tweeting, and keeping up with everything. And it was like something I haven't seen before. No one could have predicted that Biden, well, actually, everyone could have predicted that Biden would be that incoherent. But at the same time, I don't know that anyone expected it to be that bad.
right, right. Well, when he walked out, but I gotta say, so how old am I, Grace? 57. I always have to stop and do the math. All right. So I've watched a lot of presidential debates, and this is probably one of the first that you watch. Well, I guess 2020, maybe 2016. But for young people watching that debate for the first time, including some of my kids, I mean, what just a complete outlier. I
It
mean,
was
I
over
had this.
from the second Biden walked on the stage. You could already tell. The second he walked out there, it wasn't looking good for him.
Yeah, Bill
After a
Maher
week
said
of
it was like a
preparation
Mike
and
Tyson
everything.
knockout, right? Like in 90 seconds. And when he walked out, and they showed Biden first, and he had kind of a crooked look, and I thought, oh
And
man,
he's gazing.
he's not going to have a stroke, is he? I mean, and I meant that seriously. Like, I mean, I used to work in the medical field, right? And I thought, oh, this could really be catastrophic. And then he comes out and gives that opening statement where he kind of mumbles and mutters, kind of had what our Dan Flynn described as this catatonic look. And I mean, this was over before Trump even had to say anything. I'm reminded of the late great Republican strategist Lee Atwater, who knew the American Spectator, late 80s, early 1990s. He was George H.W. Bush's campaign guy, and he invoked what he called the Napoleonic maxim: never interfere with the enemy when he's in the process of destroying himself. And all Trump had to do was kind of sit back and let Joe go, and let him self-destruct. And Trump was something else. CNN really helped Trump with two things. One, a split screen, which caught all of Biden's kind of blank stares, right? Some of them just kind of like looking who knows where. And then also by cutting off the mics at the end of the question, that was a huge guide rail for Donald Trump.
It
So
actually worked well and too. And
it did. It
you know
worked
who it
great.
didn't work? It didn't work well for Biden though, because they didn't cut his mic in time most of the time
Yeah.
for him
Right.
to
Right.
ramble on and on.
Yeah. Well, he was rambling of all things. So, but in Trump's case, it really gave him guidelines, guide rails, and saved Trump from that kind of impetuousness and the sort of bombastic quality that he had in that first debate in 2020. So that really helped Trump. I thought the most entertaining exchange of the evening. And in fact, I literally laughed out loud when I heard this. It was also kind of pathetic. Golf, right? When Donald Trump said you couldn't hit a golf ball 50 yards, which everyone knows is true, right? And Trump's a good golfer. Trump bragged about whatever tournaments he won. And then when Biden said that he was a 6 or 8 handicap, he said both. Trump, being Trump, is like mortally offended by that idea, right? Well, you can't even hit a ball 50 yards. You couldn't carry my bags, right, as a caddy. And so that it was funny, but at the same time, I know we're going to talk about the founders. Maybe this is a good transition to the founders. This wasn't Lincoln Douglas, right? This wasn't Kennedy Nixon. This wasn't 40 years back, Reagan Mondale, 20 years back, George W. Bush, John Kerry. I was reading through the correspondence of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and last week, and the last letter that they exchanged, the biggest insult in the letter and maybe in the whole correspondence was Hamilton referring to Burr's language as improper and indecorous, right? And these are two guys who are about to face off in a duel. But compare that to Biden and Trump, and our people watching here, spectator followers, they like Donald Trump, and they're going to vote for Donald Trump, and they're glad that Trump won and that Biden exposed himself. But still, I mean, you do long for a day when we had debates that were just simply, more civil, more decent, more, dare I say, virtuous,
Mm.
right? And I'm glad that Biden, who's a sleazy guy, I almost wrote a piece for us called "Biden's Comeuppance," because I've known about Biden for decades. He internationally embarrassed Bill Clark, Ronald Reagan's closest advisor. Look at this. I'm at home. My wife framed this for me. There's a picture of me and Bill Clark. All
Wow.
right. Clark was like a grandfather to me. I was his biographer. I wrote the book, The Judge. He was Reagan's closest advisor. Joe Biden, February 2nd and 3rd, 1981, Clark's hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as Deputy Secretary of State. Biden embarrassed Bill Clark. And then when it was all over, and Bill Barr, Ed Meese, Clarence Thomas, some of these guys told me Biden did the same thing to them. When it's all over, cameras are all off of Bill Clark. Back in the back room, Biden comes up to him and says, "Hey, Judge," puts his arm around him. "Hey, no hard feelings there. And hey, I didn't know the answers to any of those questions either." And Clark was a virtuous guy. His kids were sitting in the front row while Biden was embarrassing him, crying, humiliated. So Biden finally got his comeuppance. He humiliated himself.
Yes, and some people say they feel bad for him. That's exactly why I don't, because he's not a good guy, never has been
No,
through his
not a
entire
good guy.
career.
Right.
Never has been.
No,
But yeah, and this is a great time to transition into what our topic is for the day. So, first of all, happy 4th of July, everyone. Hopefully,
right.
you're having and had a great time with your families and are enjoying the weekend. But Paul Kengor just wrote a piece in the American Spectator titled "The American Righteous Cause Then and Now." And what it really gets to is that the Declaration of Independence is more than just a document that declares independence. And he really digs into just kind of the history and the deepness of the virtue that was involved and to the philosophies that went along with the founding of our country. And it really is a great piece worth reading. But I guess just why don't you just share a bit about it to start? You had a lot of really great points, especially about the philosophical foundations of the document and how that's what it is in nature.
Yeah. So, what is it? Well, of course, it's a Declaration of Independence, not just capital D and capital I, but small d, small I. It is a declaration, a literal declaration declaring independence from the state of Britain, from the British Crown, from King George III, from his Parliament. But more than that, and in fact, they use the phrase at that point, United Colonies. So as uppercase U, uppercase C. United Colonies. And when they referred to twice the United States of America, the U is actually lowercase, right? So it's not yet the USA. These were the United States of America. So here you have the colonies coming together, unified, in order to oppose the British Crown. So what the document is it's a declaration of independence by those colonies from the British government. But it's a lot more than that, right? So it's a philosophical statement, a moral statement. It is about governing by the consent of the governed, the will of the people. And that gets to what the founders were really protesting was that this foreign entity from overseas, thousands of miles away, thought that it had the authority to tax them when in fact they didn't because the colonists because they didn't have the consent of the governed because the colonists hadn't voted for those people. What this was no taxation without representation. The taxes, and I've heard a number of people over the years say this. In fact, I won't say the guy's name, but he told me that they thought the founders were a bunch of whiners. And I said, whiners? What do you mean? They said, well, they're complaining about this tiny little tax on tea or the Townsend Act. He said, do you know what a small percentage tax we're talking about? And I said, okay, let's assume for the moment that you're correct. All right. And in fact, he pointed out, look at the federal income tax. It was created in 1913. Woodrow Wilson soon had it up to 73% for the upper income rate. FDR took it to 94%. FDR actually wanted the upper rate 99.5%. Now, today, it's what, 36, 39%, something like that. And his point was, I mean, look at the tax rates that we endure now. What the founders went through was just paltry by comparison. And that's true, but that ought to tell us something about what the founders believed about a foreign government being able to tax them without their consent. So the crime here, in the original document that Jefferson wrote, overall the document was, I think, 1,817 words altogether. So it's not a very long document. Jefferson wrote the original draft. Adams and Franklin edited it. The Continental Congress also edited it. In Jefferson's original draft, he used the word slavery a few times, comparing what the British Crown was doing to the colonists as a form of slavery. So they believed that it was that egregious that even if the tax was, let's say, 1% on paint or tea or glass or whatever it was still way too much if the tax was levied without the consent of the governed. So with that, they accused the king of abuses, usurpations, exact language. So they were willing to launch a revolution over that principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also made a really good point, I think, in your article. You talked about the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And I thought this was particularly interesting and a good point. And you even mentioned a quote from Paul Johnson, which I thought was also a really good point. And what he had said was that the essential difference between the two were in the origins, the American Revolution was a religious event and the French Revolution wasn't. Can you speak a bit more about that? I think that was a really interesting way to look at it also.
It's a great quote. And by the way, Paul Johnson, as a lot of people watching this know, was very close to the American Spectator. Our founder, R.M. Terrell Jr., and in fact, Bob Terrell used to visit Paul Johnson. I think Johnson died just last year or 2023, mid 90s, wrote the great book Modern Times, which we use at Grove City College as a while for our texts in our final humanities course. Wrote one of my favorite books, Intellectuals, which has a great chapter on Karl Marx, by the way, and did this book, A History of the American People. He also did a book called A History of the Jewish People, which is really good. He wrote so many good books, but he said that in A History of the American People, that the essential difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution is the American Revolution was a religious event. The French Revolution was an anti-religious event, and it indeed was. And you can see that. In fact, Johnson said, from start to finish, this defined the differences in the two revolutions. I also quote Alexis de Tocqueville, who said something very similar. Now, that was a few years after the American Revolution that Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America. But they, from the outset, and you can see this from the outset in our document that launches the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, because it talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. As I note in our article posted at our Spectator website, the Declaration of Independence mentions God 4 times. In fact, God appears in the Declaration in 4 forms.
The
What are
modern
they?
leftist dismay, by the way. I mean, this is
Yeah,
another thing. So having this conversation, I can't help but think, I mean, isn't it so crazy that so many people nowadays, first of all, don't know that, but second of all, disagree, think that, oh, God isn't mentioned, shouldn't be mentioned, has nothing to do with anything we should be doing here in America. The fact that that's become the mainstream thought and that we've allowed God to be removed from the public square is really where we've gone wrong. And obviously, the way that we're going down the hill has evidence that it really is crazy. And there are plenty of statistics and videos too about how young people are less and less patriotic. There was a Gallup poll in 2022 that found that there were record lows of people who would identify as extremely patriotic or proud to be American. So as I think about this 4th of July and just this history, I mean, hopefully people read your piece that are younger, because there's also a lot of young people who don't know anything about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the American Revolution. People don't know anything about it who are younger. So it's my hope that my generation will pay a lot more attention to these things. And I also think so part of my background before I ever went to Grove City College was that I worked for an organization called Young Americans Against Socialism. And this is
Great
something,
group.
yes, that we have in common, obviously. And that's why
And Young
Marxism.
America's Foundation, yeah, that's another, right.
Yes, it is another. And that's why Marxism has always been my favorite topic, because I spent a year working as their marketing director, where even when I was a young person, so I was in high school at the time, late into high school and I still worked there as I started college, but I got so into reading and learning as much as I could about Marxism. And that's actually how I had read one of your books before I even got to Grove City. But one of the things that we did was we hosted a book club, and we read The Law by Friedrich Bastiat, which
Oh,
I'm sure
nice.
you're familiar with, and probably a lot of the people listening are familiar with. And this was after the Third French Revolution that it was written, 1850, as sort of a response to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. But one of his famous quote from it, which is widely circulated for even those who haven't read the book, is that it's not because men have made laws that personality, liberty, and property exist, but on the contrary, it's because personality, liberty, and property existed beforehand that men have made laws. And I
Mm.
think that that's just such a great recentering of thinking about, why did the founding fathers do what they did? What was behind that? And really, like, that's the point. And a lot of people kind of forget the ins and outs of what it means to have a limited government, why we should have it, and why America was founded in the first place, what the founding fathers were doing, as you've said, with having a virtuous foundation that was based on God, that mentioned God in the documents. That's the essential part of the way that we were founded.
Yeah, and in fact, Steve Dewey, who writes often for us, he's also a Grove City College graduate. He runs the DC chapter of the Bastiat Society. We teach Bastiat at Grove City College. The problem is education. One of our longtime board members of the American Spectator, Bob Luddy, is becoming a leader in the classical Christian school movement with his Thales College, Thales Academy. And this has to start in the schools. Who was it just a few weeks ago? It was a female reporter, and she said, these Christian nationalists, right?
Yeah.
This newest phrase from the left, they believe that our rights come from God, right? And it was like, are you serious? Is she actually saying this? Bishop Robert Barron, who never gets political, did this commentary on it. He said, I don't usually call people out publicly, but I heard something that really shocked me. And he said, where does this idea come from, that our rights come not from government, but from God? Well, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Adams, the American founders, right? And in the Declaration, God is there 4 times as creator, lawgiver. How about this one, Grace? Supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions,
Mhm.
right? Divine providence. We're in the very end of the document. The founders pledged to one another their sacred honor. And so those 4 mentions in that document, and then also we're endowed by our creator with certain unalienable rights, laws of nature, and nature's God entitled them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So yeah, this is what makes us different.
And
And if
this
you're
is why
not
it's
reading,
worth protecting,
it's
why
why
it's worth
and why it's worth
preserving.
teaching correctly. And in fact, there are school districts. There's one, I often use this case in my lectures at Grove City College. It was a school in California where the teacher was attempting in a lawsuit developed over this by maybe a group like Alliance for Defending Freedom or one of those groups challenging it. But he tried to ban the Declaration of Independence from being read in his classroom because of separation of church and state. The document mentions God. Well, so what if the document mentions God? You have to read it. And you want your kids to be ignorant and not know this? And actually, well, maybe yes. Maybe I do want my students not to know that. Then someday they can go out and become a reporter and say, wow, these Christian nationalists, they believe that their rights come from God. Where are they getting this idea? If she had known the Declaration of Independence, she would know that. So it all starts with these government schools and our lousy universities. That's a place where it has to be turned around. And by reading the American Spectator or watching podcasts like this.
Of course. And just we're running out of time for this episode, but that's the most radical, ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Not reading the Declaration of Independence in school. That makes absolutely zero sense. Like,
right.
We don't even have to discuss that anymore. That's just actually ridiculous.
Exactly.
But of course, the religion that is communism and secular leftism is totally allowed because that's what it is. There's no neutral ground. And in these government schools, when they decide that they're not going to read things like that, the Declaration of Independence, or that they're going to radically...
They'll read the Quran. I bet you they'll read that.
Yeah, and that they'll radically separate Christianity from everything. I mean, that is a religious choice. There's no neutral ground, and it's evident. And we can see that based on how everything's turning out.
That's their secular religion, right? To borrow from a Reagan quote, well, Marxism, Leninism, that religion of theirs, right? Their secular progressivism is kind of a religion to them in a sense. It's what animates them. It's what drives them. It's what they're passionate about. And as Augustine said, there's a God-shaped vacuum in all of us. And if it's not filled by God, they'll fill it with something else. And that's what our secular progressives are doing.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing, and the results are not and will continue to not be pretty.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really sad, but everyone, make sure that you go and read, if you haven't, Dr. Kengor's piece. It's really, really good, really worth reading, and it gives you new insight into the Declaration of Independence and America's founding. A lot of us know the basics, but as he explained, there's a lot of just nuances that are worth reading about, reminding ourselves, especially at this time of year. So please make sure that you go and read that. And we're going to link that where we post this podcast, and it's on all platforms. So wherever you're watching now, you can also find it on other listening platforms or video platforms. But we want to thank you so much for joining us for the first episode of the Weekend Spectator with Paul and Grace. We're having a lot of fun, and hopefully you did watching too. And we're excited to see you next Saturday.
All right. And everybody, get a copy of this and send it to your friends, send it to your kids in schools, and spread the word. See you next week.
That's a great idea. Yes, especially send it to kids in schools. That's a great idea. I second that. Yes, see you next week.